and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the 2016 reboot of the Ghostbusters franchise and spiritual remake of the 1984 classic supernatural comedy of the same name, Ghostbusters, as directed this time around by Paul Feig. Now, this movie chooses to step out and do its own thing with no connection to the original Ghostbusters movies in any way, bar a number of cameos from the original stars in alternative roles. It is not a continuation of any of their stories, nor is it even set in the same universe. It completely stands apart. And for me, this is where I lost interest from the very start. The trailers made it look like, at the very least, it was set 30 years following the events of the second movie, which was released back in about 1989. But once I heard that this wasn't the case, I have to admit, I completely switched off. It's very rare that I actually go into a film with a dislike of it from the very start, before I even watch it, you know? I do try and keep an open mind, and I do try to avoid that kind of movie kind of prejudice, you know? But for me, the original Ghostbusters movie and its sequel were such a big part of my childhood, and, you know, such a major influence on my love for movies, that to find out that this new entry wouldn't even have, you know, to be able to expand on that universe, and even worse, reset everything, even given that we only ever had 2 films, this was a major blow and a big disappointment. So much so that I avoided this upon its release back in 2016, and it did take me a while to really get kind of into that vibe, to kind of want to sit and check it out. The movie is pretty much a gender-reversed version of the original film, with all the main characters now being played by female leads: Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones, respectively. Kristen Wiig plays Dr. Erin Gilbert, a scientist on the verge of tenure at Columbia University, when her past literally comes back to haunt her, having been involved in paranormal research and co-authoring a book on the subject some years earlier, but much to the disgrace of the current dean at Columbia. After investigating a haunting at a local museum and indeed witnessing spectral activity up close and personal, so to speak, after being caught on camera, Erin is dismissed from Columbia forthwith. Reluctantly, she sets up a paranormal investigation service with her friend, Dr. Abigail Yates, as played by Melissa McCarthy, her lab tech assistant and mechanics genius, Dr. Gillian Holtzman, as played by Kate McKinnon, and New York savvy Patricia Tolan, as played by Leslie Jones. Disgraced and shunned as scientists, the group looked to find a way to capture a ghost, store and study it, and provide legitimate scientific research into the world of the supernatural. However, they soon discovered that there are much bigger forces at work when they start to unravel the mystery of a number of devices found around the city, amplifying and focusing the supernatural energy around them. Soon, their research takes a backseat as they slowly emerge into being Ghostbusters, being the only ones that can stop the impending apocalypse. So, where to start with this one? I think it's reasonable to say that I was majorly disappointed with this take on the Ghostbusters idea. But in the end, I didn't end up hating it. It certainly has more negatives than positives for me, but I still found enjoyment in elements of the movie that at least made it somewhat palatable. Firstly, I just want to make one thing clear. I didn't mind the fact that the roles of the original Ghostbusters had been gender swapped. I think it was a gimmick at the time. The film is a gimmick, full stop. My main disdain for the movie stemmed purely, initially, from the fact that it opted to reset everything, to be a complete remake rather than being a continuation of the original 2 films. In any sense, regardless of how small. You know, they could have linked it somehow, but there was just absolutely nothing. I mean, surely they could have come up with something. I realised that given the time that had passed between the second movie And this, the fact that the planned third movie never really kind of seemed to get off the ground. It was going to be difficult to get all of the original cast to return as leads. And sadly, in the interim, of course, we had lost Harold Ramis, who indeed played Egon in the original movies. So no matter what came next, it was never, ever going to be the same. The baton has and was going to be passed to a new generation for sure. But this? What on earth was this? Anywho, that aside, the movie is very over the top with many, many more awkward moments than comedy. I think in the main, the comedy is forced and never kind of really feels natural or even connected with the story at certain points, ending up being more showboating than anything else. The group never really kind of seemed that tight-knit. There's no connection. And each, with each character really trying to vie for that top spot, trying to engage, we're never really trying to engage or connect. They bring us these characters without any kind of real meaningful build-up or payoff, but yet take far too long in bringing us backstories which only serve to kind of drag out the first half of the movie and bring us nothing of any real value. Its overarching plot is extremely weak and relatively uninspired, with a villain as played by Neil Casey who would be better suited at a Christmas pantomime. There is really very little in the way of substance and an emotional core. They want to make you believe that there's one there. It's just caught simply lacking. It feels like a bunch of adults trying to be kids, with more than its fill of childish humour, over-egged slime jokes and dance routine numbers, which make absolutely no sense whatsoever. Just not cool, nor funny. And it starts with quite a bit of promise too, as we're induced to this museum haunting. Nowhere near as iconic as the introduction to the original Ghostbusters, mind you, but effective enough, But then from here, all you hear is la 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 la. There are parts that drag on so much that you really do find yourself kind of switching off at times. But again, I couldn't hate it despite these misgivings. And it did indeed take far too long for them to get into this ghost-busting swing, It took far too much prep work to get them to that point. An origin story not even needed, if indeed the characters had kind of been better developed and rounded on screen. But once their version of the Ecto-1 pulled onto the screen and they donned them proton packs, I have to admit, nostalgia did take over, and they had me hooked. I wouldn't say that the action sequences are anything to write home about, but when they do start busting some ghosts, it does start to get some traction. A little patchy again, but there are at least some good moments to be had. Personally for me, I certainly enjoyed the effects, especially the ghosts, and indeed the new gadgets our team concoct. I know there's CGI to the max, but I think that they really did make good use of what they had. And indeed, upon reading up for the review, it turns out that the effects seen, not all of them were CGI. And I think that really does kind of showing the quality that we actually get here. The ghosts are amazing, to be fair. They've got this kind of real neon glow. They're different to the ones in the first two movies, granted, but they've gone to town on them, you can see. And the way that the kind of effects seep through the widescreen bars, at least on the version I watched, it really did make the effects pop like they were coming right out of the screen, with the proton blasts and slime jumping right out at the audience. Gimmicky, but definitely an experience, The soundtrack I found to be excellent too, more than a redeeming feature of the movie. This time around, we have a series of arrangements by Theodore Sharpio, which make an adventurous kind of eerie contrast to the slapstick going on in each of the scenes, but then kind of really builds this fantastic crescendo as we move to the kind of the big finale, bringing some of the original Ghostbusters theme in an absolutely epic way. I actually loved it that much that I actually went out to go get the soundtrack to listen to separately, and indeed, it is amazing. At least somebody involved in this movie, actually seemed to have watched the first two movies, when the themes and the effects kind of do combine in the end, I must say that they are pretty spectacular as we embark on the Battle of Times Square, which is one of the most standout scenes in the whole movie. It really does feel like an all-out assault with ghosts coming from every single direction. Like I said, some amazing effects and some amazing ghosts. I won't go too much into that, but even if you fast forward the whole entire film just to get to that scene, watch that scene. Well, it is like we are in the middle of the Ghostbusters video game, you know? It really is just a shame that the rest of the movie just does not quite kind of pick up the pace in the same way. There's just not enough of these moments to really make this the thrilling and exhilarating experience it really should have been. Overall, I'm not sure if this knew it was supposed to be a Ghostbusters movie or not, you know? I think it was kind of too bamboozled to be scary, poorly paced and just littered with jokes which struggled to find traction. With those involved in the movie, this should have been comedy genius. However, everybody seems to be vying for attention, showboating, and simply just missing their mark with a number of crass, crude, and pointless skits, along with a number of namesake cameos that simply just weren't as clever or nostalgic as they thought they were. You really could have kind of stripped away half of this movie, and I think it would have been a lot more functional. But most of the time, it feels clunky and kind of really full of kind of false starts. It does have some pretty decent effects and indeed a visually impressive ending, which did make up for some of the movie's misgivings. But ultimately, it's still spoilt by childish behaviour and a wasted plot. Poorly developed characters and, a poor, thinly veiled villain. But despite everything, in the end, I did want more. They literally dropped enough, that I wanted to see a little bit more. And if they hadn't have gone on so long about the group's origins, perhaps maybe a second outing may have left them to get kind of into the full swing. At least we might have got to see how they were developing the kind of the tantalising tidbit they left open at the end. I would say never mind. I know how many people feel about this film. I really do. So the fact that we don't have a sequel probably sits well with everybody. And I think, in retrospect, yes, I would have loved to have seen... I like sequels. I like expanding universes, within movies, which is why I didn't kind of like this one in the first place. But then they left it open to such an extent, then I wanted to see more of this one. Oh, never mind. I'm always bamboozled myself. But anywho, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk. Definitely love to have you back. But most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.